Tonight, as you settle into the quiet darkness, we're exploring one of humanity's most enduring mysteries, the invisible forces that draw us together and shape our deepest connections. You might think that love is simply about finding the right person, but what if it's actually an ancient pathway to understanding the very nature of reality itself? What if the way we desire, the way we connect, and even the way we struggle for power in our relationships follows patterns that philosophers and psychologists have been mapping for thousands of years? If you're enjoying these philosophical journeys into sleep, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it lets me know these gentle explorations are finding their way to the right ears. I'm always curious where you all are listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. There's something beautiful about knowing we're all drifting into these same timeless questions from different corners of the world, creating this quiet global community connected through ancient wisdom. Now dim the lights around you, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, or perhaps light a candle if that helps you unwind. Feel your body settling into whatever surface supports you tonight. A bed, a couch, that favorite chair that cradles you just right. Take a slow breath and release the day's concerns, knowing that for the next while you have nowhere else to be and nothing else to do except drift along with these gentle currents of thought. And let's ease into tonight's exploration of love as a teacher, power as an inner harmony, and desire as a mysterious guide toward something far greater than we imagined. Imagine yourself stepping into a sun-dappled garden in ancient Athens, where the late afternoon light filters through olive leaves, casting dancing shadows across weathered stone benches. The air carries the warm scent of herbs, rosemary and thyme mixing with the distant aroma of bread baking in clay ovens, and underneath it all, that particular smell of Mediterranean earth after a brief morning rain. You settle onto a smooth marble seat, feeling its coolness against your skin despite the day's warmth, and you hear the gentle murmur of water trickling through a nearby fountain, mixing with the soft rustle of leaves and the distant sound of voices engaged in passionate but peaceful conversation. This is where Socrates would have walked, where he would have stopped passers-by in the agora with his gentle but persistent questions, making them suddenly uncertain about things they thought they knew completely. Picture him, not as the marble statue we might imagine, but as a rather ordinary-looking man with a snub nose and thinning hair, someone who might remind you of that thoughtful neighbor who always seems to have time for deeper conversations. Socrates had this peculiar habit of claiming he knew nothing, yet somehow, through his questions, he could unravel the most sophisticated arguments and reveal profound truths hidden in the most everyday experiences. Like many of us, Socrates was fascinated by love, not just the butterflies in your stomach feeling of new romance, but something much more mysterious and transformative. He claimed that the only thing he truly understood was what he called the art of love, though his version of this art might surprise you. He wasn't talking about seduction or even romantic success in the way we might think of it. Instead, he saw love as a kind of divine madness that could awaken the soul to its deepest purpose. What if everything you've ever felt drawn to, every person who made your heart skip, every beauty that stopped you in your tracks, every moment of longing or connection, was actually your soul recognizing something eternal? This is the question that emerged from those ancient conversations in Athens, where a mysterious woman named Diotima would teach that love is not just an emotion, but a cosmic force, a bridge between the mortal world we inhabit and the realm of eternal, perfect forms that gives meaning to everything we experience. Consider for a moment that every time you've fallen in love, you weren't just responding to another person's charm or attractiveness, but to a glimpse of something absolute and beautiful that lives both within them and far beyond them. Diotima suggested that love begins with the physical, that initial spark when someone catches your eye. But this is just the first rung on what she called a ladder, a spiritual ascent that could lead a person from the love of one beautiful body to the love of all beautiful bodies, then to the love of beautiful souls, then to the love of beautiful ideas, and finally to the direct contemplation of beauty itself, pure and unchanging. You might recognize this progression in your own life. Perhaps you've noticed how a deep attraction to someone gradually opened your heart to appreciating beauty everywhere, or how loving one person taught you something about the nature of love itself. This isn't just coincidence or personal growth, according to this ancient wisdom. It's the soul using love as a curriculum, each relationship and each experience of beauty serving as a lesson in recognizing what the philosophers called the good, that ultimate reality that gives life its meaning and purpose. There's something deeply soothing about this idea, isn't there? That our attractions aren't random or shallow, but part of a larger pattern, a cosmic education where even our mistakes and heartbreaks are teaching us something essential about the nature of reality. As you relax deeper into this thought, you might feel how it changes the weight of your own experiences with love and desire, not making them less real or immediate, but revealing them as part of something ancient and vast and purposeful. But this philosophical vision of love inevitably raises questions about power, about who guides whom, who teaches and who learns, who leads and who follows in these sacred encounters. The ancient Athenians, for all their wisdom about love's metaphysical dimensions, lived in a world where power between men and women was distributed in ways that might shock us. Yet their insights about the inner dynamics of desire and the soul's journey toward truth continue to illuminate our understanding of what draws us together and what tears us apart. As we journey deeper tonight into these timeless patterns of human connection, you might find yourself wondering how the eternal insights of ancient philosophy connect with the discoveries of modern psychology. How the ladder of love that Diotima described might relate to what Carl Jung would later call the anima and animus, those powerful inner figures that shape our attractions in ways we barely understand. Perhaps by morning, you'll have discovered how these seemingly different approaches to the mystery of love actually weave together into a single, luminous understanding of what it means to be human and to reach across the space between souls. To truly understand Socrates' insight about love as a divine art, we need to first step back into the world that shaped him, the bustling streets and philosophical schools of classical Athens, where ideas about virtue and beauty and the good life were as vital as bread and wine. Let's allow ourselves to drift back to that ancient city, where the seeds of Western thought about love and power first took root in the conversations between a curious philosopher and anyone willing to question what they thought they knew about the human heart. This understanding opens a doorway to that ancient world where these profound insights about love first crystallized, where the very air seemed thick with questions that had never been asked before. As you drift back through time, letting yourself settle into the rhythm of a different era, imagine the cobblestones beneath your feet growing smoother, the sounds around you shifting from the familiar hum of modern life to something older, more elemental. The clip-clop of donkeys carrying amphoras of olive oil, the rhythmic chanting from a distant temple, the musical cadence of Greek voices engaged in passionate debate about the nature of reality itself. It's the 5th century before the Common Era, and you're walking through the heart of Athens on a warm spring morning when the city is just beginning to stir with the day's possibilities. The narrow streets wind between whitewashed buildings that catch and reflect the Mediterranean light, creating a play of shadows and brilliance that seems to shift with each step you take. You can smell the distinctive aroma of fig trees heavy with fruit, mixing with the sharper scent of wild thyme that grows between the stones, and underneath it all, that particular earthiness that comes after the brief spring rains have settled the dust and awakened the sleeping seeds. Picture yourself pausing at the entrance to the Agora, that great marketplace that serves as the beating heart of Athenian life, where merchants spread their wares on colorful cloth, while philosophers gather in the shade of plane trees to untangle the mysteries of existence. The morning light filters through the leaves above, casting dancing patterns on the ground where a small crowd has gathered around a rather ordinary-looking man who seems to have an extraordinary gift for making people question everything they thought they knew. This is Socrates in his element, not the marble statue we might imagine, but a living, breathing person with calloused hands from his early work as a stonemason, wearing a simple tunic that's seen better days, his bare feet comfortable on the warm stone. You might recognize something familiar in his approach, the way he listens with complete attention when someone speaks, the gentle persistence with which he asks just one more question, then another, until the most confident speaker begins to realize they don't understand their own words as well as they thought they did. What makes this scene so remarkable is not just what Socrates is saying, but the world in which he's saying it. Athens at this moment in history is a city intoxicated with its own possibilities, a place where democracy is still a radical experiment, and the idea that common citizens might govern themselves seems as revolutionary as suggesting that humans might fly. The Persian Wars have ended, leaving Athens victorious and wealthy, and for perhaps the first time in human history, enough people have enough leisure to spend their days asking questions about the good life, about justice, about the nature of love and truth and beauty. Perhaps you've experienced something similar in your own life. Those moments when circumstances align to give you the mental space to wonder about deeper things, when the immediate pressures of survival ease enough to allow your mind to wander toward questions that don't have obvious practical answers. There's something uniquely human about this impulse to use our freedom not just to gather more resources or increase our comfort, but to probe the foundations of reality itself, to ask not just how to live, but whether we're living well. As you settle deeper into this ancient scene, you begin to notice how the physical environment shapes the philosophical conversations taking place within it. The agora isn't just a marketplace, but a commons, a shared space where citizens from all walks of life inevitably encounter each other, where the merchant selling pottery might find himself drawn into a discussion with a young aristocrat about whether courage can be taught. The very architecture of the city, its open spaces, its walkable scale, its integration of commerce and civic life, creates conditions where ideas can cross-pollinate in ways that would be nearly impossible in our more segmented modern world. Imagine following Socrates as he moves through this space, stopping to examine a beautiful vase with the same attention he brings to examining a beautiful argument, chatting with the potter about the nature of craftsmanship and skill, gradually drawing the conversation toward questions about whether virtue itself might be a kind of craft that can be learned and practiced. You can almost feel the warmth of the ceramic under your fingers, see the way the morning light catches the painted figures dancing around the vase's surface, each one frozen in a moment of perfect grace that somehow contains an entire philosophy about the relationship between beauty and truth. This is the world that shaped Socrates' conviction that love, eros, is the fundamental force that drives the soul toward wisdom. In a culture where physical beauty is celebrated as a reflection of divine harmony, where the gymnasium is as important as the marketplace, where young men are expected to develop both their bodies and their minds in pursuit of excellence, the connection between aesthetic attraction and intellectual awakening seems natural, almost inevitable. When Socrates speaks of love as a divine madness that awakens the soul to its highest possibilities, he's speaking to people who understand viscerally how beauty can stop you in your tracks, how the sight of perfect proportion or graceful movement can create a hunger for something beyond the immediate pleasure of looking. You might notice how this differs from our modern tendency to separate the aesthetic from the intellectual, to treat physical attraction as somehow less serious than mental connection. In Socrates' Athens, these distinctions don't yet exist in the same way. The beautiful body and the beautiful soul are understood as related expressions of the same underlying harmony, which is why the path from loving one beautiful person to contemplating absolute beauty itself doesn't seem like such an impossible leap. As the morning progresses and the agora fills with more people, you begin to sense the undercurrents of tension that run beneath the surface of this philosophical paradise. For all its celebration of democracy and intellectual freedom, Athens remains a society built on the labor of slaves, where women are largely excluded from public life, where the very leisure that makes philosophical conversation possible depends on systems of power that few question directly. The men who gather to discuss justice and virtue return each evening to homes where their wives have no legal rights, where their comfort is maintained by people who have no voice in the democratic process that these philosophers celebrate as the highest form of human organization. This tension adds a poignant complexity to the philosophical insights emerging from these conversations. When Socrates talks about the soul's journey toward truth and beauty, he's articulating something genuinely universal, a pattern of human longing that transcends the particular circumstances of his time and place. Yet the very conditions that allow him to develop these insights also reveal their limitations, the ways that even the most profound philosophical understanding can coexist with social arrangements that seem to contradict its deepest implications. Perhaps this reminds you of contradictions in your own time and place, the way that moments of genuine insight and connection can emerge even within systems that seem designed to prevent them, how the human heart's capacity for love and beauty persists regardless of the structures that try to channel or control it. There's something both humbling and hopeful about recognizing that the questions Socrates was exploring, about how to live well, about what love really is, about the relationship between physical attraction and spiritual longing, remain as urgent and mysterious now as they were 25 centuries ago. As the day grows warmer and the conversations in the agora begin to shift toward more practical matters, the price of grain, the latest news from the Athenian colonies, the endless political maneuvering that accompanies democratic life, you might find yourself drawn to follow Socrates as he makes his way toward the quieter spaces at the city's edge, where the philosophical work goes deeper, where questions about the nature of love and knowledge give way to encounters with the specific individuals who would challenge and refine his understanding in the most unexpected ways. Following this thread deeper into the quiet spaces at the city's edge, you find yourself drawn toward one of the most extraordinary conversations in the history of human thought, a dialogue that would transform our understanding of what it means to love and to long for something beyond ourselves. As you drift along the dusty path that leads away from the bustling agora, the sounds of commerce and debate gradually fade, replaced by the gentle rustle of olive leaves and the distant call of cicadas beginning their evening song. Here, in a secluded grove where the light filters through ancient branches and creates shifting patterns on the earth below, Socrates prepares to share what he claims is not his own wisdom, but teachings he received from a mysterious woman whose insights about love would echo through millennia. Picture yourself settling onto a smooth stone bench, still warm from the day's sun, feeling the texture of weathered marble beneath your palms as you prepare to witness something unprecedented. The air carries the sweet scent of jasmine blooming somewhere nearby, mixing with that distinctive smell of sun-baked earth and the faint aroma of wood smoke drifting from distant cooking fires. You notice how the quality of light here seems different from the harsh brightness of the marketplace, softer, more golden, as if filtered through the very essence of contemplation itself. What if love, as you've always understood it, is actually just the beginning of something far more magnificent and transformative than you ever imagined? This is the question that emerges as Socrates begins to speak of Diotima, a priestess from Mantinea who taught him what he calls the art of love, though her conception of this art will challenge everything you might expect. She begins, as the wisest teachers often do, by gently undermining our most basic assumptions, suggesting that love itself, eros, is neither God nor mortal, but something wonderfully in between. Imagine Diotima's voice, perhaps carrying the musical cadence of someone accustomed to chanting sacred mysteries, as she explains that love is born of a curious parentage that perfectly captures its nature. Picture poverty herself, not the degrading kind that crushes the spirit, but the noble poverty of one who knows what she lacks and longs to fill that emptiness. She encounters resource, that clever and resourceful figure who always seems to have a plan, always scheming for the beautiful and the good. From their union comes love, eternally caught between need and abundance, always yearning yet always creative, forever a philosopher because he exists in that fertile space between ignorance and wisdom. You might recognize this description in your own experience of attraction and longing. Perhaps you felt that peculiar combination of emptiness and fullness that comes when you encounter someone who seems to embody everything you didn't know you were missing. There's something both humbling and exhilarating about this state, the way it makes you acutely aware of your own incompleteness while simultaneously filling you with energy and possibility. Diotima suggests this is not a flaw in love's design, but its very essence, the dynamic tension that makes love such a powerful force for transformation. As you settle deeper into this understanding, letting these ideas wash over you like gentle waves, Diotima begins to reveal what she calls the ladder of love, a sequence of stages that represents the soul's education in beauty and truth. Picture this ladder not as a rigid structure demanding difficult climbs, but as a natural progression, each step emerging organically from the one before, like flowers opening in sequence throughout a perfect garden designed by some master gardener who understands the rhythm of the human heart. The journey begins, Diotima explains, with what might seem like the most ordinary experience in the world, falling in love with a single, beautiful body. Imagine that moment of first attraction, when one person's physical presence stops you in your tracks, when their particular way of moving through space, or the specific curve of their smile, creates a sudden reorganization of your entire inner landscape. Far from dismissing this as superficial or unimportant, Diotima honors it as the essential first step, the spark that ignites the entire process of the soul's ascent toward ultimate truth. But something magical happens when you truly absorb the lesson of this first attraction. You begin to notice that the beauty that captivated you in one person is not actually unique to them. It's a quality that appears in countless other forms throughout the world. The same harmony of proportion that drew you to your beloved's face reveals itself in the faces of strangers, in the architecture of buildings, in the way sunlight falls across water. This recognition, rather than diminishing your original love, expands it exponentially, transforming you from someone who loves one beautiful body into someone who appreciates all physical beauty. Perhaps you've experienced this shift in your own life, the way that deeply loving one person can actually open your heart to recognizing beauty everywhere, making you more generous in your appreciation rather than more possessive or narrow. This is the ladder's second rung, and already you can sense how love is functioning as a teacher, using your particular attachment to educate you about universal principles. The ascent continues as your appreciation for physical beauty naturally leads you to recognize an even more precious form of beauty, the beauty of souls. Imagine encountering someone whose inner radiance so outshines their physical appearance that you find yourself drawn more to their character, their wisdom, their way of being in the world than to any external features. This person might not be conventionally attractive, yet something in their presence creates an attraction that feels deeper and more lasting than anything based purely on physical appeal. As you contemplate this progression, you might notice how each step doesn't negate what came before, but rather reveals it as part of a larger pattern. The love of beautiful bodies doesn't disappear when you begin to appreciate beautiful souls. Instead, it finds its proper place within a more comprehensive understanding. Physical beauty becomes one note in a larger symphony rather than the entire composition. This understanding opens naturally to the next stage of ascent, where your growing appreciation for individual beautiful souls leads you to recognize beauty in human activities and institutions. You begin to see the elegance in a well-crafted law, the harmony in social customs that bring out the best in human nature, the artistry in practices that help people flourish together. Love has become a way of seeing that recognizes the signature of beauty wherever genuine goodness appears in human affairs. Drifting further along this ascending path, you arrive at what Diotima describes as the love of knowledge itself, that vast ocean of understanding that encompasses all forms of learning and wisdom. Picture yourself standing at the edge of this infinite sea, where each wave that reaches the shore brings new insights about mathematics and music, about the movements of the stars and the secrets of the human heart. The lover who reaches this stage is no longer attached to any single manifestation of beauty, but has fallen in love with the very principle that underlies all beautiful things. And yet, even this expansive love of knowledge serves as preparation for the final, most extraordinary stage of the ascent. Diotima speaks of a moment of sudden revelation, a mystical vision where the climber of love's ladder finds themselves face to face with beauty itself, not a beautiful thing among other beautiful things, but the very form or essence from which all earthly beauty derives its power to attract and inspire. Imagine this moment not as an intellectual achievement, but as a direct encounter, like stepping from a candlelit room into brilliant sunlight, or like the moment when you finally understand a piece of music not just with your mind, but with your entire being. This beauty that Diotima describes is eternal and unchanging, neither growing nor diminishing, neither coming into being nor passing away. It is pure and perfect, unmixed with any opposing qualities, the source and standard for everything we recognize as beautiful in the world of ordinary experience. As these thoughts settle like sediment in still water, you might find yourself wondering about the ultimate purpose of this extraordinary journey. Diotima reveals that the goal of the entire ascent is not merely to contemplate beauty, but to become creative in its presence, to give birth to true virtue rather than mere images of virtue, to produce offspring of the soul that are more enduring and noble than any physical children. The one who achieves this vision becomes, in a sense, immortal, beloved by the gods, partaking in the eternal nature of beauty itself. There's something deeply restful about this vision of love as education, of desire as the soul's curriculum for learning about ultimate reality. It suggests that every attraction you've ever felt, every moment when beauty has stopped you in your tracks, every relationship that has challenged you to grow, all of these have been steps on a ladder that leads somewhere magnificent, stages in a cosmic education where the universe itself serves as your teacher, using the language of longing to guide you toward truth. This understanding opens a doorway to an even deeper mystery: how this cosmic education through love connects to the very structure of our inner being, the way our souls are organized to receive and respond to beauty's call. As you settle more deeply into contemplation, letting these ideas about love's ascending ladder wash over you like gentle waves, you might begin to notice how this entire process depends on something that Socrates and Plato understood as the soul's natural architecture. The way consciousness itself is designed to move from confusion toward clarity, from ignorance toward wisdom, from the particular toward the universal. Picture yourself in a beautiful three-story house, each level representing a different aspect of your inner life, all connected by graceful spiral staircases that allow movement between the floors, but also provide each level with its own distinct character and purpose. The warm afternoon light streams through tall windows, casting dancing shadows on polished wooden floors, while the scent of jasmine drifts up from the garden below, mixing with the subtle aroma of beeswax candles and the faint smell of leather-bound books that rest on shelves throughout the upper floors. What if the reason Diotima's ladder of love feels so natural, so inevitable in its progression, is that it perfectly mirrors the structure of consciousness itself? This is the insight that emerges when we explore Plato's understanding of the soul as composed of three distinct but interconnected parts, each with its own desires, its own form of wisdom, and its own role to play in the journey toward truth and happiness. Imagine yourself beginning in the ground floor of this inner house, the realm that Plato associated with our appetitive nature, that part of us that craves food and drink, seeks physical pleasure, desires material comfort and security. There's nothing shameful about this level. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible, like the strong basement that supports a magnificent building. You can feel the earthiness of this floor, the way it connects you to your body's needs, the simple satisfaction that comes from basic nourishment and physical well-being. Picture the furniture here as comfortable and substantial. Thick cushions that invite you to rest, sturdy wooden tables laden with simple but nourishing food, large windows that look out onto fertile gardens where you can see the cycles of growth and harvest that sustain all life. This is where you experience the first rung of love's ladder, that initial attraction to physical beauty, the way a lovely face or graceful form can capture your attention and awaken desire. It's immediate, instinctual, rooted in the body's ancient wisdom about what promotes life and flourishing. Perhaps you've noticed how this level of desire, while powerful, can also become consuming if it's the only floor of the house you inhabit. Someone who never moves beyond the appetitive level might spend their entire life seeking more intense pleasures, accumulating more possessions, trying to satisfy an hunger that can never quite be filled because it mistakes the foundation for the entire building. There's a restlessness here, a sense of always wanting something just out of reach, like trying to quench thirst by drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. Following the spiral staircase upward, you arrive at the middle floor, the realm that Plato called the spirited part of the soul. Here the atmosphere changes dramatically. You can feel the energy crackling like electricity before a storm. The air itself seems charged with possibility and ambition. This is the floor of courage and competition, of the desire for recognition and honor, of that fierce protective instinct that rises when someone threatens what you care about. The furnishings here are more dynamic, banners that flutter in the breeze, shields and trophies that catch the light, maps of unexplored territories calling to your sense of adventure. You might recognize this part of yourself in moments when you felt called to stand up for what's right, when you've pushed yourself to achieve something difficult, when you've experienced that peculiar satisfaction that comes not just from getting what you want, but from earning it through effort and skill. This is where love's ladder moves beyond simple physical attraction to appreciation for noble souls, for people whose character inspires you to become better than you thought possible. Interestingly, this spirited level of the soul serves as a natural ally to the highest floor, that realm of wisdom and contemplation that represents consciousness at its most refined and expansive. Picture yourself climbing the final staircase to reach this upper level, where the light becomes softer and more golden, where the windows offer views that stretch to distant horizons, where the very air seems thin and rarefied like the atmosphere on a high mountain peak. As you settle into this contemplative space, perhaps in a comfortable chair positioned to catch the last rays of afternoon sunlight, you begin to understand how the soul's architecture creates the possibility for that ultimate vision that Diotima described. The rational part of the soul, what Plato called logos, is like a skilled architect who can see the blueprint of the entire house, who understands how each floor serves the functioning of the whole, who can appreciate beauty not just for its immediate appeal, but for the way it reflects eternal principles of harmony and proportion. This is where the love of knowledge flourishes, where you might find yourself absorbed in contemplating mathematical relationships or musical harmonies, where the patterns that underlie all beautiful things become visible like constellations emerging as the sky grows dark. Here, perhaps, you encounter those moments of insight when everything suddenly makes sense, when the scattered pieces of your experience organize themselves into a coherent vision of how life could be lived with wisdom and grace. You might have experienced glimpses of this level during moments of deep concentration, when you've been so absorbed in reading or thinking or creating that you lose track of time, when the boundary between yourself and what you're contemplating seems to dissolve. There's a quality of peace here that's different from the satisfaction of the appetitive level or the excitement of the spirited level, a profound stillness that feels complete in itself, needing nothing more than this direct contact with truth and beauty. But the real magic of Plato's vision lies not in any single level of the soul, but in the harmony that emerges when all three parts work together under the guidance of wisdom. Picture this inner house functioning at its best, the ground floor providing stable foundation and healthy energy, the middle floor contributing courage and noble ambition, the upper floor offering vision and understanding that gives direction to the whole enterprise. When reason rules, not as a tyrant suppressing the other parts, but as a wise conductor drawing forth the best contribution that each part can make to the symphony of a well-lived life. As you contemplate this vision of inner harmony, you might notice how it transforms your understanding of what power really means. In our ordinary thinking, we often imagine power as the ability to control others, to impose our will on the external world, to accumulate resources or influence that make us feel safe and important. But the Socratic understanding suggests that true power is something entirely different: the capacity of the rational soul to create order and beauty within its own domain, to achieve that state of inner music where every part of our being contributes to a life of genuine flourishing. This kind of power can't be taken away by external circumstances because it doesn't depend on anything outside itself. The person whose soul is well-ordered, whose reason guides their appetites and inspires their courage toward worthy goals, possesses a kind of unshakable strength that remains constant whether they're wealthy or poor, praised or criticized, healthy or facing illness. They've discovered the secret that Socrates was pointing toward when he claimed that no one can harm a good person, not because good people are immune to suffering, but because their deepest source of strength lies in something that external circumstances cannot touch. Perhaps you can sense how this understanding of the soul's architecture provides the foundation for everything else we'll explore together. The way psychological patterns echo these ancient insights. The way modern understanding of emotional intelligence builds upon this classical foundation. The way the eternal questions about love and power continue to find new expression in each generation. There's something deeply restful about discovering that your inner conflicts and aspirations follow patterns that the wisest human beings have mapped for thousands of years, that your struggles toward wisdom and love are part of a cosmic curriculum that has been guiding souls toward their highest possibilities since consciousness first awakened to its own nature. Perhaps you can sense how this understanding of eternal patterns guiding human development leads us naturally into a moonlit landscape of a different kind, where the discoveries of the 20th century illuminate these ancient insights with the soft light of psychology's deeper understanding. As these thoughts about the soul's architecture settle like sediment in still water, you might find yourself drifting forward through time, leaving the sun-dappled groves of ancient Athens to enter the shadowed forests of the modern psyche, where a Swiss doctor named Carl Jung would rediscover these same patterns of love and power operating in the hidden depths of the unconscious mind. Picture yourself stepping into Jung's consulting room in Kusnacht, near Lake Zurich, where the afternoon light filters through heavy curtains and creates an atmosphere of scholarly twilight. The air carries the scent of pipe tobacco and leather-bound books, mixing with that particular mustiness that accumulates in rooms where people have shared their deepest secrets for decades. You can hear the gentle ticking of an antique clock, the distant sound of water lapping against the lakeshore, and occasionally the soft scratch of pen on paper as Jung makes notes in his careful, methodical handwriting. What if the ancient Greeks' understanding of love as a divine force leading the soul toward truth was actually describing something that modern psychology would rediscover operating in the unconscious depths of every human being? This is the revolutionary insight that emerges as Jung explores what he calls the collective unconscious, that vast, shared psychic foundation that underlies individual consciousness like an underground ocean beneath separate islands, containing universal patterns that he names archetypes, eternal figures that shape our deepest attractions and conflicts in ways we rarely recognize. Imagine yourself descending into this luminous underworld, not through any physical movement, but through the gentle relaxation of the conscious mind's usual boundaries, the way you might sink into a warm bath and feel the day's tensions dissolving into something deeper and more spacious. As you drift down through the layers of personal memory and individual experience, you begin to encounter figures that feel both utterly familiar and mysteriously foreign. The wise old man who appears in dreams to offer cryptic guidance, the great mother who embodies both nurturing love and devouring possession, the divine child who represents new possibilities, and perhaps most importantly for understanding romantic attraction, those inner figures Jung called the anima and animus. Picture the anima as that eternal feminine presence that lives in the depths of the masculine psyche, not a particular woman, but the essence of all that men typically experience as other, yet long to connect with. She appears in dreams, sometimes as a mysterious stranger whose face you can never quite remember upon waking, sometimes as a figure of transcendent beauty who beckons toward unknown possibilities, sometimes as a wise woman whose counsel seems to emerge from sources deeper than ordinary knowledge. You might recognize her influence in those moments, when a man finds himself powerfully drawn to someone who embodies qualities he feels he lacks, perhaps a woman whose emotional expressiveness awakens his own capacity for feeling, or whose intuitive understanding reveals dimensions of experience he never knew existed. Interestingly, Jung suggests that this archetypal figure serves as a bridge between consciousness and the unconscious, a kind of psychological priestess who mediates between the ego's limited understanding and the self's broader wisdom. When a man falls in love, particularly in that intense, all-consuming way that feels like destiny or divine intervention, he's often experiencing the projection of his anima onto an actual woman, mistaking his own inner feminine nature for qualities that belong entirely to another person. The beloved becomes a screen onto which the psyche projects its own unrealized potentials, creating that sense of magical recognition that makes new love feel like coming home to a place you've never been. As you contemplate this process, drifting deeper into understanding, you might notice how it mirrors the stages of Diotima's ladder in a strikingly contemporary way. The initial physical attraction that begins the ascent toward beauty itself corresponds to what Jung would describe as the anima's most primitive form, love focused entirely on the biological and instinctual. But just as Diotima's ladder leads from appreciation of one beautiful body to love of all beauty, Jung's process of individuation involves gradually withdrawing these projections, learning to recognize the anima as an inner figure whose wisdom can be accessed directly rather than sought through another person. Perhaps you've experienced something like this in your own relationships, the way that early infatuation can feel like discovering your missing half, followed by the gradual recognition that the other person is their own complete individual with their own complexities and shadows. Jung suggests that this disillusionment, though often painful, represents the beginning of genuine relationship, the moment when love transitions from projection to authentic encounter between two separate beings who have learned to carry their own wholeness rather than seeking completion through merger. The animus operates in a parallel way within the feminine psyche, representing those qualities traditionally associated with masculinity: focused thinking, decisive action, spiritual authority, the capacity to articulate and defend ideas. You might picture him as appearing in dreams as a powerful king or wise teacher, sometimes as a creative artist whose work channels inspiration from unknown sources, sometimes as a warrior whose strength protects what needs protection. Like the anima, the animus serves as a bridge to the unconscious, but his particular gift is helping consciousness develop its capacity for clarity and discrimination. Following this thread deeper into Jung's understanding, you encounter one of his most profound insights about the relationship between love and power. Where the ancient Greeks saw these as potentially harmonious forces, with love leading toward wisdom and true power emerging from the soul's internal order, Jung perceives a more complex dynamic, a fundamental opposition between what he calls eros and the will to power. In his view, these represent two entirely different ways of engaging with the world, two incompatible approaches to existence that reveal the deepest conflicts within the human psyche. Picture eros as a principle of connection and integration, the psychological force that seeks to bring together what has been separated, to heal divisions both within the individual psyche and between people. This is love not as sentiment or romance, but as a cosmic principle of unity, the drive toward wholeness that expresses itself through genuine caring, creative collaboration, and the kind of deep empathy that allows you to feel another person's experience as if it were your own. When eros dominates, relationships become opportunities for mutual growth and understanding, where differences are appreciated rather than eliminated, where vulnerability is met with tenderness rather than exploitation. The will to power, by contrast, emerges from what Jung describes as the ego's desperate attempt to maintain control, to establish superiority over others as a defense against feelings of inadequacy or fear. You might recognize this force in those moments when someone seems more interested in winning an argument than understanding another perspective, when the need to be right becomes more important than the truth, when relationships become battlegrounds where one person's gain necessarily requires another's loss. Jung suggests that this drive often develops as compensation for deep feelings of inferiority, the psyche's attempt to overcome a sense of weakness through domination rather than through genuine strength. As you settle deeper into this understanding, letting these ideas wash over you like gentle waves, you might notice how Jung's insight illuminates patterns in your own experience of attraction and conflict. Perhaps you've encountered people whose presence felt immediately expansive, who seemed to invite you to become more than you thought possible, whose very being radiated that quality of eros that makes connection feel like coming alive. And perhaps you've also met those whose energy felt contractive, who seemed to need you to be smaller so they could feel larger, whose love came with conditions that required you to abandon essential parts of yourself. Jung's great contribution to understanding human relationships lies in his recognition that these forces, eros and the will to power, cannot coexist within the same psychological space. Where love reigns, he suggests, there is no room for the desperate grasping of power-seeking. Where the will to power dominates, genuine love becomes impossible because everything must serve the ego's agenda for control and superiority. This creates what we might call the fundamental choice that shapes every relationship, whether to approach another person as an opportunity for mutual flourishing or as a resource to be captured and controlled. Yet Jung also offers hope through his understanding of individuation, that lifelong process of psychological development where the ego gradually learns to serve the deeper wisdom of the self, rather than demanding that everything serve its own narrow interests. As this transformation unfolds, the will to power naturally dissolves, not through suppression, but through the discovery of a more authentic form of strength, one that emerges from wholeness rather than from the desperate attempt to fill inner emptiness through external conquest. You might find yourself wondering how these insights about archetypal patterns and the conflict between love and power connect to the lived experience of your own heart, how the hidden dynamics Jung discovered manifest in those moments when you felt that mysterious pull toward another person, that sense of recognition that seems to emerge from depths you didn't know existed within you. As you drift deeper into contemplation, letting these psychological insights settle like morning dew on familiar landscapes, perhaps you can begin to recognize the ancient dance that has been choreographing your own relationships all along, the way projection and withdrawal, merger and separation, create the eternal rhythm of human connection. Picture yourself in a quiet cafe on a rainy afternoon, the kind of place where time seems to slow down and the ordinary world takes on a dreamlike quality. The windows are fogged with condensation, creating a sense of intimate enclosure while the sound of rain pattering against glass provides a gentle percussion for your thoughts. You can smell the rich aroma of coffee beans mixing with the faint scent of wet earth that drifts in each time someone opens the door, and feel the warmth of ceramic against your palms as you wrap your hands around a steaming mug, letting the heat seep into your fingers while your mind wanders through memories of attraction and longing. Perhaps you've experienced that moment when someone walks into a room and something shifts in the very atmosphere around you, as if they carry with them a magnetic field that reorganizes the space, making everything feel more vivid, more charged with possibility. You might remember the peculiar quality of that first glimpse, not just physical attraction, though that may be part of it, but something deeper, a sense of recognition that feels both utterly new and strangely familiar, as if you're seeing for the first time someone you've been waiting your whole life to meet. What's happening in these moments, Jung would suggest, is the projection of the anima or animus, that inner figure we explored earlier now finding what seems like its perfect external embodiment. The person standing before you becomes a screen onto which your psyche casts its most cherished image of wholeness, the missing piece that promises to complete the puzzle of your existence. They seem to embody all the qualities you've longed for but felt were somehow beyond your reach. Perhaps a way of being in the world that feels more authentic than your usual persona, or an emotional depth that makes your ordinary interactions seem shallow by comparison. Imagine watching this projection unfold like a movie projected onto clouds, where the images seem real and substantial until the wind shifts and reveals them as temporary formations of light and shadow. In those first days or weeks of intense attraction, the beloved seems almost magical, capable of understanding you in ways that previous lovers never could, their mere presence creating a sense of rightness that makes you wonder how you ever lived without them. They speak and you hear echoes of your own unexpressed thoughts. They move through the world with a grace that seems to reveal hidden dimensions of existence you never noticed before. You might recognize this feeling from your own experience. The way new love can make everything else in life seem suddenly secondary. How conversations with the beloved feel charged with significance, while interactions with everyone else begin to feel flat and colorless. This is the anima or animus at work, using another person as a vehicle for showing you aspects of yourself that have been waiting in the unconscious, qualities and capacities that want to be born into conscious expression, but can only be glimpsed initially through their reflection in another. As you settle deeper into this understanding, allowing yourself to remember without judgment those times when you've been caught in love's initial spell, you might notice how this projection serves a profound developmental purpose. The beloved doesn't actually possess the magical qualities you attribute to them, but your psyche's willingness to see these qualities in them reveals something important about your own potential for growth. The emotional depth you admire in them points toward your own capacity for feeling. The creativity or wisdom or courage that draws you to them reflects possibilities that exist within your own nature, waiting to be cultivated and expressed. Picture two dancers beginning their performance, each initially seeing in the other a perfect partner whose every movement seems to anticipate and complement their own. They move together with an ease that feels effortless, as if they were designed to dance together, their bodies finding rhythms that neither could achieve alone. This is the magic of early projection, the way it creates an immediate sense of harmony and understanding that can feel like coming home to a place you've never been. But as Jung understood, this initial harmony inevitably gives way to a more complex dance as the projections begin to withdraw and the real individuals start to emerge from behind the archetypal masks. Perhaps you've experienced that moment when something your beloved says or does suddenly jars against the image you've constructed of them, when their actual personality asserts itself in ways that don't match your unconscious expectations. The person you thought was endlessly understanding reveals moments of selfishness. The one who seemed emotionally wise sometimes acts with surprising immaturity. The creative soul you fell in love with turns out to have mundane concerns about paying bills and taking out the garbage. This disillusionment, though often painful, represents what Jung saw as the beginning of genuine relationship. As long as you're in love with your own projection, you're not really in relationship with another person, but with an aspect of yourself that you've placed outside of yourself. The withdrawal of projection, that gradual recognition that the other person is their own complete individual with their own complexities and shadows, creates the possibility for authentic encounter between two separate beings who have learned to carry their own wholeness rather than seeking completion through merger. Interestingly, this process mirrors the stages of Diotima's ladder in reverse. Where the ancient ascent moved from love of one particular body toward appreciation of universal beauty, the modern psychological journey often begins with projection of universal archetypes onto one particular person, and then moves toward appreciation of their unique, individual reality. Both paths, however, lead toward a similar destination: the recognition that what we seek outside ourselves is ultimately something that must be developed and integrated within our own being. Perhaps you've noticed in your own relationships how the most profound growth often emerges from the disappointments and conflicts, rather than from the moments of perfect harmony. When your partner fails to live up to your projections, when they reveal aspects of themselves that challenge your comfortable assumptions, they're actually offering you the gift of reality, the opportunity to encounter them as they truly are rather than as your psyche needs them to be. These moments of friction, though uncomfortable, create the possibility for real intimacy, the kind that emerges when two people choose to remain present with each other despite their differences, rather than trying to force each other into predetermined molds. As you contemplate this dance of projection and withdrawal that shapes so many of our deepest connections, you might find yourself feeling a kind of gentle compassion for all the times you've been caught in love's initial spell, all the times you've felt disappointed when reality failed to match your fantasies, all the times you've struggled to see another person clearly through the mist of your own projections. There's something beautifully human about this process, the way our psyches use relationship as a laboratory for discovering and integrating the parts of ourselves that we couldn't access any other way. Jung's insight suggests that the ultimate goal of this entire dance is not to eliminate projection altogether. That would be neither possible nor desirable, but to develop the capacity to recognize it when it occurs, to hold it lightly rather than desperately, to use it as information about our own development rather than as a demand that others conform to our inner blueprints. When we can appreciate the beloved both for the archetypal qualities they temporarily carry for us, and for their own unique reality that exists independent of our psychological needs, we begin to taste what mature love might actually be. Not the desperate merger of two incomplete halves, but the generous encounter between two whole beings who choose to share their wholeness rather than seeking to complete each other. This understanding naturally leads us to wonder about the broader landscape in which these intimate dances of projection and recognition unfold, the social and historical contexts that shape how love and power have been distributed and experienced across the centuries, how the archetypal patterns we've been exploring have played out in the actual lives of men and women struggling to find authentic connection within the constraints and possibilities of their particular time and place. This understanding naturally leads us to wonder about the broader landscape in which these intimate dances of projection and recognition have unfolded throughout history, how the archetypal patterns we've been exploring have played out in the actual lives of real people trying to find authentic connection within the constraints and possibilities of their particular time and place. As these thoughts about love and power settle like sediment in still water, you might find yourself curious about how even the greatest philosophers have navigated the gap between their loftiest ideals and the messy, beautiful reality of sharing daily life with another human being, particularly in societies where the distribution of power between men and women created challenges that echo through the centuries. Picture yourself walking through the narrow, winding streets of ancient Athens as the afternoon sun begins to cast longer shadows. The warm stone beneath your feet still radiating the day's heat, while the scent of cooking fires and fresh bread drifts from nearby homes. You can hear the distant murmur of voices from household courtyards, the soft clatter of pottery, and the splash of water from wells. The everyday sounds of a civilization that produced some of history's most profound insights about love and justice, while also maintaining social arrangements that seem strikingly unjust by contemporary standards. What if the very tensions between philosophical ideals and social realities that we notice in our own time were equally present in ancient Athens, where the same culture that gave birth to democracy and produced Socrates' revolutionary insights about the soul also systematically excluded women from political participation and confined them largely to domestic spaces? This paradox comes alive when we consider the relationship between Socrates himself and his wife, Xanthippe, whose story reveals the complex ways that power and love interweave even in the lives of those who have thought most deeply about virtue and wisdom. Imagine yourself invited into their modest household, where the contrast between public philosophy and private reality creates a fascinating study in the challenges of living wisely within imperfect systems. The house itself would have been simple by our standards: whitewashed walls, a small courtyard open to the sky, rooms furnished with little more than basic necessities, since Socrates famously cared nothing for material wealth. You can almost feel the rough texture of the wooden furniture, smell the olive oil burning in small clay lamps, hear the domestic sounds that form the backdrop to one of history's most intriguing marriages. Xanthippe has come down to us through history largely as a caricature, the shrewish wife who made her philosopher husband's life miserable with her nagging and complaints, the woman who supposedly dumped water over Socrates' head and provoked his famous quip about thunder being followed by rain. But what if this traditional portrayal tells us more about how later generations of men preferred to remember her than about who she actually was? Perhaps you can sense how this stereotype might have served a particular function, allowing male readers to dismiss her criticisms rather than examining the very real constraints and frustrations she faced. Picture Xanthippe not as a one-dimensional shrew, but as a complex woman trying to manage a household with extremely limited resources, while married to a man who spent his days in philosophical conversation rather than earning money. You might imagine her practical concerns: how to feed their 3 children when Socrates refuses paid teaching positions out of principle, how to maintain their modest home when her husband regularly brings guests for dinner without warning, how to navigate a society that gives her no legal rights or independent status, while shouldering primary responsibility for the family's daily survival. As you contemplate this domestic scene, you might begin to understand Xanthippe's frustrations as something more profound than mere shrewishness. In a culture where women had virtually no formal power, unable to own property, represent themselves in court, or participate in political life, a sharp tongue and forceful personality might have been among the few tools available for expressing legitimate grievances and maintaining some semblance of agency within her own household. Her outspokenness, rather than being a character flaw, might represent a form of resistance against a system that rendered women voiceless in all public forums. Interestingly, Socrates himself seems to have appreciated his wife's spirited nature more than the anecdotal tradition suggests. According to some accounts, he valued her challenging personality as a kind of philosophical training, arguing that if he could get along with Xanthippe, he could get along with anyone in the world. This perspective suggests he recognized her strong will not as a burden, but as a gift that helped him develop patience, understanding, and the kind of practical wisdom that abstract philosophical discussions couldn't provide. Perhaps you've noticed similar dynamics in your own relationships or those around you. The way that the people who challenge us most directly often turn out to be our greatest teachers. even when their methods feel abrasive or uncomfortable. Xanthippe's refusal to be deferential, her insistence on speaking truth as she saw it, might have served as a crucial counterbalance to the admiration and respect Socrates received from his philosophical companions, keeping him grounded in the realities that most intellectuals prefer to avoid. Following this thread deeper into their relationship, you encounter one of the most poignant moments in Plato's dialogues, the scene in the Phaedo where Xanthippe appears on the morning of Socrates' execution. Here, rather than the quarrelsome wife of popular legend, we meet a woman overwhelmed with grief, weeping as she's led away so that Socrates can spend his final hours in philosophical conversation with his male friends. This brief glimpse reveals the depth of her attachment to a man whose principles she may have questioned, but whose essential goodness she clearly recognized. As you reflect on this tender scene, you might sense how it illuminates the broader tensions between the archetypal patterns we've been exploring and the concrete realities of historical existence. Socrates clearly saw something valuable in Xanthippe's challenging nature, perhaps recognizing in her the kind of fierce, uncompromising spirit that he himself embodied in his philosophical pursuits. Yet the social structures of Athens prevented her from expressing this spirit in any forum beyond the domestic sphere, creating a poignant gap between her potential and her possibilities. This gap reveals something important about the difference between psychological power and social power, between the inner authority that comes from strength of character and the external authority that societies grant or withhold based on gender, class, and other factors. Xanthippe possessed what we might call the power of presence, the ability to command attention, to speak truth, to resist being diminished or ignored. But this inner strength existed within a system that systematically denied women any formal channels for influence beyond their roles as wives and mothers. You might recognize echoes of this tension in your own time, where the inner capacities for wisdom, creativity, and leadership that both men and women possess must still navigate social and institutional structures that don't always provide equal opportunities for expression. The archetypal figures Jung described, the anima and animus, the wise woman and the king, exist as potentials within every psyche, but their manifestation in the world continues to be shaped by cultural expectations and systemic barriers that vary dramatically across different societies and historical periods. Perhaps there's something both humbling and hopeful about recognizing that even Socrates, with all his wisdom about virtue and the examined life, could not transcend the limitations of his historical moment. His marriage to Xanthippe reveals the eternal challenge of trying to live with integrity within imperfect systems, of attempting to honor both our highest philosophical insights and our most basic human needs for connection, understanding, and mutual support. As you settle deeper into this contemplation of how love and power play out in the space between ideals and reality, you might find yourself wondering how these ancient patterns continue to evolve in our contemporary world, how modern thinkers have built upon the insights of Socrates and Jung to develop new approaches for navigating the eternal challenges of human relationship. Following this thread deeper into our present moment, imagine yourself in a contemporary space that somehow contains elements from all the eras we've visited. Perhaps a library or study where ancient marble columns support modern glass walls, where candlelight mingles with the soft glow of screens, where leather-bound volumes of Plato rest beside contemporary books on psychology and relationship wisdom, all bathed in the kind of timeless light that makes past and present feel like different rooms in the same infinite house. Picture yourself settling into a comfortable chair in this synthesis space, feeling the soft fabric against your skin, while the scent of old books mingles with the fresh aroma of coffee, creating an atmosphere where ideas from different centuries can meet and converse like old friends, discovering their deep connections. You can hear the gentle hum of modern life, perhaps the distant sound of traffic or the soft whir of air conditioning, mixing with the profound silence that accumulates in places dedicated to contemplation and understanding. What if all the insights we've been exploring, Diotima's ladder of love, Plato's harmonious soul, Jung's archetypal projections, and the eternal tensions between intimacy and power, could be woven together into a practical philosophy for our time, a contemporary wisdom that honors both our highest spiritual aspirations and our most basic human needs for connection and understanding. This is the beautiful alchemy that emerges when we consider the work of modern thinkers who have inherited these ancient questions and found new ways to make them relevant for people trying to build authentic relationships in a complex and rapidly changing world. Imagine encountering the gentle wisdom of someone like Elaine de Botton, whose approach to love represents a fascinating synthesis of classical philosophy and contemporary psychology, filtered through the lens of practical experience and compassionate realism. Picture him as someone who might have studied with both Socrates and Jung, yet finds himself writing for people who live in apartments and work in offices, who meet potential partners through apps and navigate relationships while managing careers and mortgages, and the countless small complexities of modern existence. De Botton's revolutionary insight begins with a simple but profound observation that our culture has become dangerously obsessed with the beginning of love, with that magical period of falling and being in love, while knowing almost nothing about how love might continue and deepen over time. You might recognize this pattern in your own experience or in the stories that surround us, the way movies and novels typically end with the couple getting together, as if the real journey begins only after the credits roll. Picture love in de Botton's vision not as a feeling that strikes like lightning, but as a skill that must be learned and practiced, like playing a musical instrument or tending a garden. This reframing transforms the entire landscape of relationship from something that happens to you into something you actively cultivate, requiring patience, attention, and the kind of dedicated practice that any meaningful endeavor demands. Just as a musician doesn't expect to play beautifully without years of practice, or a gardener to grow prize roses without understanding soil and seasons, de Botton suggests that expecting love to flourish without conscious skill development is both naive and ultimately self-defeating. As you contemplate this shift from love as enthusiasm to love as craft, you might notice how it echoes the ancient Greek distinction between different types of love: the passionate eros that ignites attraction, the steady philia that sustains friendship, and the committed agape that chooses to care regardless of fluctuating emotions. De Botton's love as skill draws primarily from the latter too, suggesting that while eros might bring people together, it's the cultivation of philia and agape that allows them to build something lasting and meaningful. Following this thread deeper, you encounter de Botton's perhaps most radical proposition, that the key to successful long-term love lies not in finding the perfect person, but in developing the capacity to love an imperfect one well. This idea stands in stark contrast to our culture's romantic mythology, which suggests that finding your soulmate will solve all your relationship challenges. Instead, de Botton proposes that mature love begins with a profound acceptance of what he calls our mutual damage, the recognition that everyone carries wounds from their past, blind spots in their awareness, and irritating habits that will never completely disappear. Picture this acceptance not as resignation, but as liberation, the relief that comes from dropping the exhausting project of trying to be perfect for each other, and embracing instead the more interesting and sustainable project of learning how to be kind to each other despite your imperfections. You might remember moments in your own relationships when this kind of acceptance created space for genuine intimacy, when acknowledging flaws paradoxically allowed you to connect more deeply than when you were trying to maintain idealizations. Interestingly, this modern approach to love's challenges mirrors the ancient and psychological wisdom we've been exploring. Just as Diotima's ladder required the lover to eventually move beyond attachment to any particular person toward love of beauty itself, Diotima's mature love requires moving beyond attachment to romantic projections toward appreciation of the actual person standing before you. And just as Jung's individuation process involves withdrawing projections and integrating shadow material, Diotima's love-as skill requires facing both your own and your partner's less attractive qualities with curiosity rather than disappointment. As you drift deeper into this contemporary synthesis, you might notice how it provides practical tools for navigating the eternal tension between love and power that Jung identified. When love is understood as a skill, rather than just a feeling, power dynamics become opportunities for practice rather than threats to be eliminated. The partner who challenges you, who refuses to conform to your expectations, who insists on maintaining their own perspective, this person becomes not an obstacle to love, but your greatest teacher in learning how to love skillfully. Perhaps you can sense how this reframing transforms everyday relationship conflicts from battles to be won into puzzles to be solved together. When someone you love acts in ways that trigger your frustration or disappointment, the question shifts from, how can I change them? To, how can I respond in a way that honors both my needs and theirs? This subtle change in perspective can transform the entire emotional landscape of a relationship, moving it from a power struggle toward a collaborative creative project. The skills that Diotima and other contemporary relationship teachers emphasize: deep listening, emotional regulation, clear communication, the ability to repair after conflicts, the capacity to maintain your own center while remaining open to another's influence. These are remarkably similar to what ancient philosophers called wisdom and what Jung described as the ego's healthy relationship to the self. They represent the practical, everyday expression of insights that have been developed over millennia of human reflection on the nature of love and consciousness. You might find yourself recognizing these skills in action during your own best relational moments, times when you've been able to stay curious instead of defensive during a difficult conversation, when you've chosen kindness over being right, when you've managed to hold space for both your partner's pain and your own without trying to fix or change anything, just offering the gift of presence and understanding. There's something deeply hopeful about this contemporary approach to ancient wisdom, the way it suggests that the insights of philosophers and psychologists can be translated into practical guidance for ordinary people trying to create extraordinary connections. It implies that the capacity for love, real love, not just romantic projection, is not a rare gift possessed by a few, but a learnable skill available to anyone willing to practice with patience and dedication. As these thoughts about modern love as practiced wisdom begin to settle like gentle snow covering familiar landscape, you might sense how they create a bridge toward understanding not just romantic relationships, but all forms of human connection. The way these same principles of skillful attention, compassionate acceptance, and conscious choice shape our ability to navigate the intricate web of relationships that define our daily lives. Drifting further along this philosophical path, imagine yourself moving through your own contemporary world with new eyes, seeing how the ancient insights about love and power manifest in the ordinary interactions that fill your days. The colleague who challenges your ideas, the friend who needs support during difficult times, the family member whose way of being in the world differs so dramatically from your own. Picture yourself in a peaceful cafe on a quiet morning, the kind of place where natural light streams through large windows and creates shifting patterns on wooden tables worn smooth by countless conversations. You can hear the gentle hum of the espresso machine, the soft murmur of voices engaged in intimate dialogue, the rustle of newspaper pages, and the quiet clicking of laptop keys as people tend to their various projects and connections. The air carries the rich aroma of coffee beans and fresh pastries, mixing with that particular scent of possibility that seems to accumulate in spaces where people gather to share ideas and presence. Perhaps you've noticed how the skills that contemporary relationship teachers describe as essential for love, deep listening, emotional regulation, clear communication, the ability to stay present during conflict, are remarkably similar to what ancient philosophers called wisdom and what modern psychology recognizes as emotional intelligence. This convergence across centuries and disciplines suggests something profound about human nature, the way certain capacities for connection and understanding appear again and again as essential ingredients for a life well lived, regardless of the particular cultural context or historical moment. What if emotional intelligence, as psychologists Daniel Goleman and others have described it, represents the practical, measurable expression of insights that philosophers and mystics have been pointing toward for millennia? Picture this form of intelligence not as something you either possess or lack, but as a collection of learnable skills that can be developed through practice and attention, much like learning to play a musical instrument or becoming fluent in a foreign language. The ability to recognize and understand your own emotions, to manage them skillfully rather than being overwhelmed by them, to perceive and respond appropriately to the emotions of others. These capacities transform every interaction from a potential source of stress into an opportunity for connection and mutual understanding. Imagine yourself practicing one of these skills in a moment of everyday challenge, perhaps when someone cuts you off in traffic, or when a friend cancels plans at the last minute, or when you receive feedback at work that initially triggers defensiveness. You might picture the pause that becomes possible when you've developed the capacity to notice your initial emotional reaction without immediately acting on it, the space that opens up between stimulus and response where wisdom can enter. In that pause, you might find yourself asking different questions, not "how can I prove I'm right?" but "what's really happening here?" or "how can I respond in a way that honors both my needs and theirs?" As you settle deeper into contemplating these everyday applications of ancient wisdom, you might notice how emotional intelligence serves as a bridge between the individual insights we've been exploring and the broader social dimensions of human flourishing. When Jung spoke about the conflict between love and the will to power, he was describing something that plays out not just in intimate relationships, but in every context where people with different needs and perspectives must find ways to coexist and collaborate. Following this thread deeper, you encounter the fascinating territory of what researchers call social intelligence, the capacity to navigate complex group dynamics, to understand the unspoken rules and emotional currents that shape collective behavior, to contribute to environments where everyone can do their best work and feel valued for their unique contributions. Picture yourself in a team meeting where tensions are running high, where different people have strong opinions about the direction of a project, where the potential for conflict feels almost palpable. Social intelligence in such moments involves the ability to sense what's happening beneath the surface of the conversation, to recognize when someone's apparent opposition might actually be masking a concern that hasn't been adequately addressed, to find ways to honor different perspectives while moving toward solutions that serve the larger good. Perhaps you've experienced moments when you or someone else managed to transform a potentially destructive group dynamic through the skillful application of these capacities, offering genuine appreciation for someone's concerns before expressing disagreement, asking questions that helped reveal common ground that hadn't been visible before, or simply holding space for difficult emotions to be expressed and acknowledged rather than pushed aside or dismissed. These are moments when love, in its broadest sense as a commitment to connection and mutual flourishing, finds practical expression in the world of work and community engagement. Interestingly, this expansion of love's domain beyond romantic relationships echoes the highest stages of Diotima's ladder, where love of one beautiful person eventually transforms into love of beauty itself, appreciation for the good wherever it appears. In contemporary terms, This might manifest as the kind of leadership that inspires others not through force or manipulation, but through genuine care for their development and well-being, or the kind of citizenship that considers the impact of personal choices on the larger community, or the kind of friendship that celebrates others' successes rather than feeling threatened by them. You might recognize these qualities in people who seem to carry a particular kind of presence. Those individuals who somehow make everyone around them feel more capable and worthy, who can walk into a room and shift the entire energy towards something more collaborative and creative. They're not necessarily the most charismatic or conventionally powerful people, but they possess what we might call the authority of love, the influence that emerges naturally when someone has learned to hold their own center while remaining genuinely open to others' experiences and perspectives. As you contemplate these contemporary expressions of timeless wisdom, you might notice how they offer hope for addressing some of the most challenging aspects of modern life. The polarization that seems to divide communities, the sense of isolation that can persist even in our hyperconnected world, the feeling that meaningful work and authentic relationships are becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. If emotional and social intelligence are indeed learnable skills, if the capacity for love in its fullest sense can be developed through practice and intention, then perhaps the problems that seem most intractable are actually invitations to collective growth and learning. Picture yourself moving through your daily life with this understanding integrated into your being, responding to difficult people with curiosity rather than judgment, approaching conflicts as opportunities to understand different perspectives rather than battles to be won, offering your presence and attention as gifts that cost nothing but create immeasurable value. This is love as a social practice, wisdom applied to the countless small interactions that ultimately determine the quality of life in families, workplaces, and communities. There's something deeply optimistic about this vision of human possibility, the way it suggests that the insights of philosophy and psychology don't have to remain abstract concepts, but can become lived realities that transform ordinary experience into something richer and more meaningful. When ancient wisdom about the soul's journey toward truth meets contemporary understanding of how brains and hearts actually learn and change, the result is a practical path toward the kind of life that philosophers have always claimed is possible. A life where love and wisdom guide action, where power serves connection rather than domination, where the pursuit of individual flourishing naturally supports the flourishing of all. As these reflections on love's contemporary expressions begin to dissolve into something even more fundamental, you might find yourself approaching the place where all seeking eventually arrives. That quiet space where understanding gives way to simple presence, where the questions that have guided our journey together start to fade into the deeper mystery of what it means to be human, and to share this brief, precious existence with other conscious beings who are also finding their way home to themselves. Following this thread to its natural conclusion, imagine yourself now in a vast, starlit landscape where all the places we've visited tonight shimmer on the horizon like distant cities, whose lights grow softer and more ethereal with each gentle breath you take. Each one beautiful and meaningful, yet no longer demanding your attention or analysis. Picture yourself lying on soft grass in this infinite field, feeling the earth's gentle warmth beneath you while the cool night air caresses your skin, carrying with it the faintest traces of all the scents we've encountered along our journey. The olive groves of ancient Athens, the jasmine that bloomed near Socrates' contemplative spaces, the leather and tobacco that filled Jung's scholarly study, the coffee and possibility that permeated our contemporary cafe reflections. Above you stretches a canopy of stars so vast and luminous that they seem to pulse with the same rhythm as your own quiet breathing, each point of light representing perhaps some insight or moment of understanding that arose during our time together, now taking its place in the larger constellation of human wisdom that has been growing brighter for millennia. What if all the seeking and questioning and careful analysis that characterizes so much of human existence including our exploration tonight of love and power, and the soul's journey toward truth, is ultimately just a prelude to this moment of simple being, where you no longer need to understand anything or solve any problems or improve yourself in any way, but can simply rest in the profound mystery of consciousness itself. There's something deeply satisfying about allowing all the concepts we've explored to settle into the background like furniture in a familiar room, still present and available if needed, but no longer the focus of attention as awareness itself becomes the object of gentle appreciation. Perhaps you can sense how this dissolution of intellectual seeking into pure presence echoes the highest insights of every tradition we've touched upon tonight. Diotima's ladder of love ultimately leads not to possession of beauty, but to a kind of participatory awareness, where the lover becomes one with the very process of loving, where the distinction between seeker and sought begins to blur like the edges of objects in twilight. Plato's harmonious soul finds its deepest peace not in the achievement of perfect order, but in the recognition that harmony is the natural state when all striving ceases, when the parts of the psyche stop competing and simply rest in their essential unity. Jung's process of individuation, with all its careful attention to projections and archetypal patterns, eventually arrives at what he called the self, not as something to be attained, but as what remains when all the false identifications and psychological constructions are gently released, like leaves falling from a tree to reveal the essential structure that was there all along. Even the modern insights about emotional intelligence and love as a learnable skill point toward this same understanding, that the highest skillfulness often looks like effortless naturalness, the kind of presence that emerges when you stop trying so hard to be present and simply allow yourself to settle into what you already are. As you drift deeper into this recognition, you might notice how the very process of falling asleep mirrors this philosophical journey from complexity to simplicity, from effort to ease, from knowing to unknowing. The mind that has been so active throughout the day, tracking thoughts and solving problems and maintaining the intricate narrative of selfhood, gradually begins to relax its grip on all these mental constructions, allowing them to soften and blur like watercolors in the rain, until only the most essential awareness remains, peaceful and undisturbed and mysteriously empty of content, yet somehow full of infinite possibility. There's a beautiful paradox in how sleep, which we might think of as the absence of consciousness, actually reveals consciousness in its most pure and unadorned form. When you're on the very edge of falling asleep, in that liminal space where thoughts become dreams and dreams dissolve into something even more subtle, perhaps you catch glimpses of what the philosophers and mystics have always been pointing toward, an awareness that exists prior to and independent of all the stories and identities and relationship dynamics that usually capture your attention, a presence that is simply here, requiring nothing and rejecting nothing, holding space for whatever arises, while remaining fundamentally untouched by the changing contents of experience. Picture this awareness as being like the sky that holds all weather, the passionate storms of new love, the gentle rains of everyday affection, the turbulent winds of conflict and misunderstanding, the clear sunshine of moments when everything feels perfectly aligned. The sky itself is never damaged by any of these phenomena. It provides the spacious context within which they can arise and pass away, remaining eternally present and unperturbed while participating intimately in the dance of clouds and light and atmospheric pressure that creates the ever-changing display of meteorological experience. Perhaps you can begin to sense how all the relationship dynamics we've explored tonight, the projections and withdrawals, the power struggles and moments of genuine intimacy, the archetypal patterns and conscious efforts to love more skillfully, are like weather patterns in the sky of your essential being. They arise, they play out their various dramas, they teach you what they have to teach, and then they dissolve back into the vast spaciousness that is your deepest nature, leaving you somehow enriched by the experience yet unchanged in your fundamental essence. This understanding doesn't diminish the importance of all the practical wisdom we've explored about communication and emotional intelligence and learning to love well despite our imperfections. If anything, it provides the foundation that makes such learning possible, the stable ground of being from which genuine responsiveness can emerge. When you know yourself as this aware presence that is always already here, always already whole, the relationships in your life become opportunities for creative play rather than desperate attempts to complete yourself through another person's love or approval. As you settle even more deeply into this recognition, feeling your body growing heavier and more relaxed with each breath, while your mind becomes correspondingly lighter and more spacious, you might sense how tonight's journey through philosophy and psychology has been like following a spiral path that seems to lead away from where you started, but actually brings you back to the same place with new eyes, deeper appreciation, and a kind of effortless understanding that doesn't depend on remembering specific concepts or retaining particular insights. The love that Socrates and Diotima described as the soul's deepest longing, the harmony that Plato saw as the goal of all philosophical effort, the integration that Jung mapped as the purpose of psychological development, the skillful presence that contemporary teachers offer as the foundation of mature relationship. All of these point to what you are discovering right now in this moment of allowing everything to be exactly as it is, without need for improvement or analysis or even comprehension. There's nothing more you need to understand tonight, nothing to remember or hold onto or figure out. All the wisdom that was meant to find you through our time together has already taken root in ways that go deeper than conscious memory, like seeds planted in fertile ground that will sprout when the conditions are right, nourishing your capacity for love and presence in ways you may never directly attribute to this particular journey, but which will nonetheless bear fruit in countless small moments of grace and understanding throughout your days. Perhaps you can feel yourself beginning to merge with the vast, peaceful darkness that surrounds and permeates everything, that mysterious space where all boundaries dissolve and all questions find their rest, where the search for love reveals itself as love's own movement toward itself, where the very consciousness that sought wisdom recognizes itself as the wisdom it was seeking all along, and where the gentle rhythm of your breathing becomes indistinguishable from the eternal breath that moves through all things, carrying you now into the deepest rest, where dreams and dreamlessness dance together in perfect harmony, and where whatever remains of this night's exploration will continue its patient work of transformation in the quiet depths of sleep. And so these ancient questions about love and power dissolve like morning mist into the deeper rhythm of your breathing, where Socrates' wondering and Jung's wisdom become indistinguishable from your own quiet knowing, no longer separate thoughts, but part of the vast silence where all seeking comes to rest. Perhaps there was never anything to understand, only this gentle releasing into what you already are, this space between heartbeats where philosophy becomes dream and dream becomes the eternal dance of consciousness, exploring itself through every connection, every longing, every moment of recognition that ripples outward like circles on still water, carrying Diotima's ladder into realms beyond memory. Where love is no longer something you do, but something you are, where power transforms into presence, and presence melts into the infinite tenderness that holds all forms of seeking and finding, all questions and answers, all waking and sleeping, until there's only this soft current flowing through awareness itself, carrying you deeper into the place where understanding needs no words, only this gentle breathing into what always was and always will be.